Based on your request, I'll create a suspenseful screenplay that follows the psychological thriller structure you've outlined. Here's the full script. She knew his childhood nickname. He never told her. The box sat on Marcus's coffee table, unopened. Plain cardboard, no return address. Just his name scrawled in handwriting he didn't recognize. He circled it slowly, like a predator assessing prey, though he couldn't say which of them was which. 3 weeks since Claire had vanished without explanation. And now this, appearing on his doorstep like an accusation. His fingers grazed the packing tape, hesitating, remembering how she had whispered his childhood nickname against his ear one Sunday morning, Mook. A name no living person should know. What terrified him most wasn't the possibility that she had been researching him all along. It was the alternative, that she somehow knew things she couldn't possibly know, things buried so deep he barely remembered them himself. The tape recorder he'd found hidden in her closet had contained his 6-year-old voice, singing a nonsense song his grandfather had taught him. When he finally gathered the courage to open the box, would he find more fragments of his past that should have remained forgotten? Or something worse, proof that it wasn't coincidence at all? Marcus Ellery's life had been meticulously constructed around predictability. His apartment in Waltham was minimalist but comfortable. Glass coffee table, grey sectional sofa, white walls adorned with abstract prints in black frames. The spreadsheet on his laptop tracked his morning jogs down to Woo, the second, mapped against his heart rate and caloric intake. His cabinets contained exactly 14 days' worth of non-perishable food at all times. The senior systems analyst position at PharmaQuant gave him the financial stability and professional distance he craved. Relationships were the only variable he couldn't completely control, which is why he'd largely avoided them since Melissa had left 18 months ago. Then came Claire. They met at a pharmaceutical data conference where she was representing a competing analytics firm. She had approached him after his presentation, not with questions about his methodology like the others, but with an observation about the way he kept adjusting his cuffs when answering difficult questions. "Nervous habit?" she'd asked, with no judgment in her voice, just warm curiosity. Something in her quiet attentiveness had disarmed him. They exchanged numbers. Coffee became dinner, became weekend mornings, reading separate books in comfortable silence. Claire slipped into his life with unsettling ease. She anticipated his moods with an accuracy that should have required years of intimacy. When he developed a migraine after a stressful meeting, she appeared with his preferred brand of extra-strength pain reliever before he'd mentioned the headache. She knew to lower her voice in the mornings before his coffee, that he preferred the blinds exactly, half open when watching movies, that he couldn't stand the sound of metal cutlery against ceramic. Little things, things couples learn over time, except they had known each other just under 4 months. "It's what makes us work," she'd said once, curled next to him on the sofa. "I understand you." He had accepted this explanation then, even found it comforting. The efficiency of being known without having to explain himself was appealing, until the nickname, Sunday morning, coffee steam rising between them, Claire watching an old rerun of Cheers while Marcus reviewed code on his tablet. Without looking, away from the screen, she had said, "You're such a mook when you concentrate like that." His fingers froze over the tablet, the nickname his grandfather had given him when he was 4, after he'd mispronounced milk as mook. The name only his grandfather and brother had ever used, and both had respected his request to stop using it after he turned 12. His grandfather had been dead for 17 years. His brother lived in Oregon, and they spoke maybe twice a year. "What did you call me?" he'd asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Claire had glanced at him, her expression puzzled, then amused. "Mook? It just sounds like you. Why, don't you like it?" "Where did you hear that name?" "I didn't hear it anywhere. It just came to mind." She touched his hand, her fingers cool, against his suddenly feverish skin. "Marcus, are you okay?" He'd nodded, forcing a smile. "Just surprised. That was my nickname as a kid. No one's called me that in decades." Claire had looked genuinely surprised. "Really? That's bizarre." Then she'd laughed. "Maybe I'm psychic." But the unease had settled in his chest like a stone. And in the days that followed, it only grew heavier. Marcus began watching Claire more carefully. cataloguing her behaviors, her questions, her seemingly innocent comments. He'd catch her staring at him sometimes when she thought he wouldn't notice, her expression unreadable. The pillow comment came next. They were getting ready for bed, and Claire had casually asked, "Do you still sleep with a pillow between your knees? I noticed you don't do it anymore." Marcus stopped, removing his watch. "What do you mean anymore?" Claire looked up from her book, distracted. "You said you noticed I don't sleep with a pillow between my knees anymore. I haven't done that since I was a child. My mother used to tease me about it." Claire's brow furrowed. "Did I say that? I must have meant something else." "What else could you have meant?" "I don't know, Marcus, I'm tired." She turned off her bedside lamp and rolled away from him. "Let's just go to sleep." He lay awake beside her for hours, listening to her breathe, wondering if she was really asleep. The next morning, he called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. While Claire was at her office, Marcus methodically searched her belongings. Her laptop password was simple, the name of her childhood dog plus her birth year. Her browser history showed nothing unusual. No searches for his name, no social media stalking. Her emails were mundane. Work correspondences, newsletters, confirmations, for online purchases. He found a small leather-bound journal in her nightstand drawer. Most entries were cryptic, fragments of thoughts rather than detailed accounts. Nothing about him specifically, though several entries mentioned feelings of disorientation or déjà vu. One from 2 years earlier caught his attention. "Dream of the blue house again, same boy. He looks at me like he knows me." Marcus took photos of several pages before carefully returning the journal exactly as he'd found it. That afternoon, he installed a motion-activated camera in the living room bookshelf, disguised among his technical manuals, another in the hallway angled toward the bedroom, a third in the kitchen, hidden in a decorative bowl. When Claire returned that evening, she brought soup and crackers, assuming he was genuinely ill. "How you look terrible," she said, her concern appearing genuine as she pressed a cool hand to his forehead. "No fever, but you're pale. Have you eaten today?" He hadn't. The soup tasted good, and her care seemed so normal, so authentic that he almost convinced himself he was overreacting. Almost. "I was thinking about my childhood today," he said carefully, watching her face. "My brother and I used to build elaborate forts in our basement. We'd pretend we were surviving an apocalypse." Claire smiled. "That sounds like fun." "Nathan would always insist on being the leader." "Nathan was always bossy, wasn't he?" she said absently, scrolling through her phone. Marcus set down his spoon. Nathan was his brother's middle name. Everyone called him William or Will. Only their parents had occasionally used Nathan, and only when they were angry with him. "How do you know my brother's name is Nathan?" he asked quietly. Claire looked up, confusion crossing her features. "You told me, didn't you, when you were talking about your family that time?" "No, I've never mentioned him by name to you." She laughed nervously. "Well, I must have heard it somewhere. Maybe you mentioned it while I was half asleep." "I haven't spoken to my brother in months, Claire, and I always call him Will." Silence stretched between them. Claire set down her phone. "Marcus, you're scaring me a little. Are you sure you're feeling okay? Maybe you should see a doctor." He didn't respond, just continued watching her, noting the way her fingers twitched slightly against the tabletop. She was nervous now. Good. That night, he pretended to sleep beside her, keeping his breathing deep and regular. At 2:17 a.m., he felt her carefully extract herself from bed. Through barely opened eyes, he watched her take her phone from the nightstand and slip out of the bedroom. He waited 30 seconds before following, moving silently down the hallway. Claire stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in a whisper. "Happening again. I think he suspects something." "No, I haven't. I know what you said, but I can't just..." "Yes, I understand. By Friday, then." She ended the call, stood motionless for a long moment, then deleted something from her phone before returning to bed. Marcus barely made it back under the covers before she entered. His heart hammered so loudly he was certain she could hear it, but she simply slid in beside him and eventually drifted to sleep. He lay awake until dawn, reviewing every interaction they'd ever had, every strange coincidence, every unexplainable moment of intuition. The next day, while Claire was in the shower, he checked her phone again. No record of the call, no unfamiliar numbers in her call history, nothing in her text messages that seemed suspicious. He searched "happening again" in her emails. Nothing. Whoever she was speaking to, she was being careful. His paranoia escalated. He began creating deliberate inconsistencies in his routine to see if Claire would notice. He set his alarm 30 minutes earlier, chose different jogging routes, wore colors he normally avoided. She adjusted seamlessly, never questioning the changes, never appearing surprised. One evening, he deliberately left out an old photo album on the coffee table, pictures from his childhood that he kept in a storage box in his closet. When Claire came home, she settled beside him on the sofa and picked it up. "I haven't seen these before," she said, flipping through the pages. Her fingers paused on a Halloween photo. Marcus at age 7 dressed as a knight, his brother as a robot. "That was the year your mum forgot to pick you up from the school party, wasn't it?" The air seemed to vanish from the room. That memory had never been documented, never shared. It was a deeply private humiliation, standing alone outside the school for nearly 2 hours. Other children's parents giving him pitying glances, his costume soaked from unexpected rain. His mother had eventually arrived, distracted and unapologetic. It had been the beginning of the end of his trust in her. "How could you possibly know that?" His voice was barely audible. Claire looked up, confused at first, then alarmed as she registered his expression. "You told me about it. I've never told anyone about that day, not even my therapist." She closed the album slowly. "Marcus, you must have. How else would I know? That's what I'm asking you." Claire set the album aside and turned to face him fully. "Listen to me. I know this sounds strange, but sometimes I just know things. I can't explain it. I'll have a thought or an image about someone, and it turns out to be true. It's happened my whole life." Marcus stared at her. "You're claiming to be psychic. I don't know what I am." Her voice was steady now. "But I would never use it to hurt you. I care about you, Marcus." He stood up, putting distance between them. "I need some air." Outside, he walked for hours, his mind racing through possibilities. Was she mentally ill? A con artist? Something else entirely? He called his brother, something he rarely did without scheduling it first. "Will, it's Marcus. I need to ask you something odd." His brother sounded surprised. "What's going on? Did you ever tell anyone about my nickname, the one Grandpa gave me?" "Mook. No, man, that was just between us and Grandpa." "Why?" Marcus explained about Claire, about the strange coincidences, the inexplicable knowledge of his past. Will was quiet for a long moment. "Look, I don't want to freak you out more, but I haven't mentioned that nickname to anyone. Not even Sarah knows about it." After hanging up, Marcus didn't return home until past midnight. Claire was asleep or pretending to be. He slept on the sofa, waking at every small sound, imagining her standing over him, watching. In the morning, Claire acted as though nothing had happened. She made coffee, kissed his cheek, mentioned a dinner, reservation for Friday. Marcus nodded, played along. That afternoon, he left work early and drove to Claire's office building. He waited outside until he saw her exit for her usual coffee break, then approached the receptionist. "I'm here to see Claire Winters," he said, using the confidence that came from belonging in corporate spaces. The receptionist looked confused. "I'm sorry. There's no one by that name working here. She's in data analytics. Been here about 2 years." The woman shook her head. "Sir, I've been at this desk for 3 years. We've never had an employee named Claire Winters." Marcus's skin went cold. He pulled out his phone, showed her a picture of Claire from a weekend hike they'd taken. The receptionist studied it, then shrugged. "I'm sorry, I don't recognize her." He left in a daze, drove to Claire's supposed apartment building, a place he'd picked her up from several times but never entered. The directory in the lobby listed no C. Winters. The doorman had never heard of her. When he returned to his own apartment, Claire was there, chopping vegetables for dinner as if everything was normal. He stood in the doorway watching her, trying to understand what was happening. "You don't work at Syntech Analytics," he said flatly. Claire's knife paused mid-chop. She didn't turn around. "I never said I did." "You did. That's how we met. At The conference. She resumed chopping, her movements precise and unhurried. No, Marcus, we met at the coffee shop near your office. You were working on your laptop. I asked if I could share your table. That's not... He stopped, suddenly uncertain. Had that been their first meeting? No. He distinctly remembered the conference, her business card with the Syntec logo. Marcus, Claire said softly, turning to face him, I think you should talk to someone. You haven't been yourself lately. Stop it, he hissed. Stop making me question my own memories. Her expression was perfect concern, perfect empathy. I'm worried about you. That night, while Claire slept, Marcus reviewed the footage from his hidden cameras. In 3 weeks of recordings, there was nothing unusual, just Claire moving normally. Through their daily routines, nothing to explain how she knew what she shouldn't know. Nothing to confirm his growing suspicions that she was somehow manipulating him. The next morning, Claire was gone. No note, no message. Her toothbrush remained in the bathroom holder, her favorite sweater still draped over the bedroom chair. But her phone was gone, along with the small travel bag she kept in the closet. The cassette player was missing too. For 2 days, Marcus called her number repeatedly. It went straight to voicemail each time. On the 3rd day, the number was disconnected. He drove to her supposed workplace again, showed her picture to anyone who would look. Nobody recognized her. He filed a missing persons report, but the police seemed skeptical when he couldn't provide her correct workplace, her parents' names, or even her home address. Sometimes people just leave, Mr. Ellery, the officer had said kindly. Relationships end. But this wasn't a normal ending. People don't just disappear, leaving half their belongings behind. They don't invent false workplaces or know impossible things about your childhood. The package arrived exactly 3 weeks after Claire's disappearance. A plain cardboard box with no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note that simply read, I'm sorry it had to be like this. Marcus plugged the drive into his laptop. It contained a single video file. With trembling fingers, he clicked play. The video showed a childhood bedroom, his childhood bedroom, with the solar system wallpaper and the blue carpet. A boy, himself at perhaps 6 years old, sat cross-legged on the bed, talking animatedly to someone off camera. The footage was grainy, obviously transferred from an older format. And Mook is my special name, the child Marcus was saying. Only Grandpa and Will call me that. A woman's voice, gentle but unfamiliar. That's a nice special name. Do you like having a name that's just for family? The boy nodded enthusiastically. It's like a secret. Mom doesn't even use it. Can I tell you another secret, Marcus? Sometimes people know things about you that seem impossible, but it's not magic. It's just because they care enough to really see you. Child Marcus looked confused, then bored, as children often do when adults speak in riddles. The camera moved closer, and a hand came into frame. A woman's hand with a small birthmark between the thumb and index finger. Exactly like Claire's hand. Someday you might meet someone who knows you better than you know yourself, the woman continued. Don't be afraid when that happens. The video ended. Marcus sat motionless, his mind struggling to process what he'd seen. The timestamp on the video showed it had been recorded 33 years earlier, but Claire couldn't have been more than 35 now. And that voice, it was similar to Claire's, but not identical. Older somehow, more weathered. The knock. On his door came as he was watching the video for the 3rd time. 3 sharp raps. Marcus approached cautiously, peered through the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway. Not Claire, but someone with the same coloring, the same posture. Older, perhaps in her 50s. When he opened the door, she smiled sadly. Hello, Marcus, she said. I believe you've been looking for my daughter. The woman, Catherine, she called herself, sat across from him at his kitchen table. She declined. Coffee, water, anything he offered. She simply placed her hands flat on the table, palms down, and began to speak. Claire has a condition. It runs in our family. She knows things she shouldn't know, sees things that haven't happened yet or happened long ago. It started when she was very young. Impressions, feelings, fragments of other people's memories. Marcus stared at her. You expect me to believe she's psychic?" Catherine shook her head. "That word is too simple, too carnival. What Claire experiences is more like temporal displacement, past and future bleeding into her present awareness. That's impossible, is it? 22 years ago, you stood outside your elementary school for 2 hours in the rain wearing a night costume, waiting for your mother who never came. No one was there to see you except a woman driving past. She stopped, asked if you needed help. You refused, too proud or too afraid to accept. That woman was me." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Catherine continued, "I never forgot your face, the stubborn dignity of a child determined not to cry. Years later, when Claire started describing a boy in her dreams, a boy with your exact features, I knew it wasn't coincidence. I don't understand what you're saying. Claire didn't research you, she didn't stalk you. She's been connected to you somehow since that day I drove past, when she finally found you at that coffee shop 3 months ago." "The conference," Marcus interrupted. "We met at a pharmaceutical data conference." Catherine smiled sadly. "No, you were at the conference that day. Claire watched you from across the lobby but couldn't bring herself to approach. She followed you to a coffee shop afterward and introduced herself there. The conference story was simpler to explain than the truth." Marcus's head throbbed. "If what you're saying is true, which it can't be, why did she leave? Why not just explain?" "Because the last time she tried to explain this to someone she cared about, they had her committed." Catherine's eyes held his. "And because she started seeing things about you that frightened her." "What things?" Catherine stood. "That's not for me to say. Claire left because she needed to break the connection. Sometimes these attachments become too intense, dangerous even. I need to talk to her." "That's not possible." Catherine placed a small object on the table, a vintage key with an ornate bow. "This was my mother's. Claire has its twin. If you truly care about her, you'll let her go." After Catherine left, Marcus sat alone in his apartment for hours staring at the key. None of this made sense. Temporal displacement, psychic connections. It was the stuff of science fiction, not reality. And yet, how else could Claire have known the things she knew? He turned the key over in his hand, feeling its weight, the worn edges that spoke of decades of use. What door was it meant to open? His phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Some questions aren't meant to be answered, Mook." Marcus felt a chill run through him. He typed back, "Claire?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Let me go, please." "Not until you explain the video, the nickname, all of it." "I can't." "Then meet me one last time." The response took nearly 10 minutes to come through. "The lighthouse, tomorrow, 2 p.m. Marcus knew which lighthouse she meant. They'd driven past it once, and Claire had commented on its beauty, its resilience against the constant battering of waves. He'd suggested they visit sometime, but they never had. The next day dawned clear and cool. Marcus drove the hour and a half to the coast, the key tucked securely in his pocket. The lighthouse stood stark white against the blue sky, its red top gleaming in the sunlight. Claire was already there, sitting on a bench overlooking the water. She wore a heavy sweater despite the mild temperature, her hair pulled back in a way he'd never seen before. When she turned at his approach, her eyes held none of the warmth he remembered. "You shouldn't have come. You invited me." "I shouldn't have." She looked out at the water again. "This has to end, Marcus." He sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. "Just tell me the truth. How did you know those things about me? About my childhood?" Claire sighed, a sound filled with resignation. "The first time I saw you, I was 5 years old. Not in person, in a dream or what I thought was a dream. You were crying in a blue room. I felt what you felt, abandoned, betrayed. It was overwhelming. When I woke up, I told my mother about the sad boy. She recognized you from that day outside. Your school. That's impossible, I know, but it kept happening. Fragments of your life filtering into my awareness. Sometimes I'd hear your voice, a teenager arguing with your father, a young man laughing with college friends. I'd see through your eyes for brief moments, feel your emotions. Why me? Why not someone else? I don't know. My grandmother had something similar. Connections to strangers she'd never met but somehow knew intimately. Sometimes it lasted days, sometimes years. She called them temporal echoes. Marcus struggled to process this. So when we met, I already knew you, parts of you anyway. Things no one should know about another person without earning that intimacy. Claire finally looked at him directly. I thought maybe it was fate, that we were supposed to find each other. But now I think it was cruel, to both of us. The tape, Marcus said. The recording of me as a child. Claire looked away. My mother made it. When I was 12, my episodes with you were getting worse. I was losing track of my own life, spending too much time in fragments of yours. She tracked down your family, invented a reason to visit. Something about a school fundraiser. She recorded you talking, thinking it might help me distinguish between your memories and my reality. That's insane. That's stalking. Yes, she realized that afterward. She destroyed the tapes, or thought she did. I found one in her things years later. A gull cried overhead, wheeling against the sky. Marcus felt untethered, as if reality itself was coming undone around him. What was on the video you sent me? Who was that woman? Claire's expression darkened. My grandmother. That footage is from 1990. She sought you out after I first started having visions about you. She was trying to understand the connection. That's not possible. She'd have had to know I'd meet you decades later. Yes? Claire's voice was barely audible over the sound of the waves. That's what terrifies me, Marcus. What if none of this is random? What if we're just playing out something that's already happened? They sat in silence, the implications too vast to articulate. Finally, Marcus pulled the key from his pocket. Your mother gave me this, said you have its twin. Claire nodded, reaching into her sweater to pull out an identical key on a silver chain around her neck. Family heirloom. These keys open a cabinet in my grandmother's house. Inside are journals, records of everyone she ever connected with. Their lives, their secrets, their futures, including mine. I don't know, I've never had the courage to look. Marcus stared at the key in his palm. And if we open it together, then we'll know if we have a choice in any of this. Claire stood. But I won't do that. I'm breaking the connection, Marcus. That's why I left. Why I have to leave again. Wait. He reached for her arm, but she stepped back. There's something else I saw, something I didn't tell you. Her eyes were filled with a sorrow that chilled him. In your future, something dark. Tell me. She shook her head. Knowledge changes paths, changes choices. I have a right to... No. No one has a right to know their future, Marcus. That's the burden I carry. She took another step back. Don't try to find me again, for both our sakes. Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, her figure growing smaller against the vastness of the ocean beyond. He could have followed, demanded more answers, insisted on the truth. Instead, he watched her go, the key heavy in his hand. 3 days later, Marcus returned to his normal routine. Morning jog, silent breakfast, work at the pharmaceutical data firm. His apartment was exactly as it had been before Claire entered his life, as if she had never existed at all, except for the key, which he kept in his desk drawer, and the unanswered questions that woke him in the night. 1 week after the lighthouse meeting, a small envelope arrived in his mail. Inside was a newspaper clipping from 27 years earlier, a small-town obituary for a woman named Eleanor Winters, survived by her daughter Catherine and granddaughter Claire. The photograph showed a woman in her 70s with kind eyes and a birthmark between her thumb and index finger. The same woman from the video, the same birthmark as Claire's. The obituary noted that Eleanor had been known in the community for her uncanny intuition and had often provided comfort to those in need by knowing just what troubled their hearts. Paperclipped to the clipping was a note in unfamiliar handwriting. History doesn't always repeat. Sometimes it just echoes. Marcus stared at the documents, then slowly reached for his phone. He hesitated, his finger hovering over his brother's contact information. Will would tell him to let it go, to accept that some things couldn't be explained. that Claire was troubled or worse, dangerous. Instead, he opened his Maps application and entered an address he'd memorized from Catherine's driver's license when she'd set her purse down in his apartment. A house in a small coastal town 3 hours north. A house that might contain a cabinet, which might contain answers, or perhaps just more questions. As he grabbed his keys and headed for the door, the final text Claire had sent him flashed through his mind again. Some questions aren't meant to be answered, Mook, but some questions demanded to be asked, regardless of the consequences. If this story held you captive until now, like the video and subscribe. The next one might be waiting for you right now. And there's another one, waiting just beside this one. Maybe it explains what's missing from this story. Maybe it makes everything worse. You listened, but not everything was told.